Often I want to talk about things that I think are very important and impactful in our culture and society. And I think this story does, although it's a kind of local instance, it does have ramifications from a federal judge's ruling on free speech in the United States. And not only did he win a free speech ruling, but he actually beat a red light ticket. So I'm like, well, I don't know if he actually beat the red light ticket, but it's a funny story of a guy fighting a red light ticket and actually ended up winning a major victory for free speech. This is from Motherboard. Oregon unconstitutionally fined a man $500 for saying, "I am an engineer," federal judge rules. Mats Jarlstrom has won his First Amendment case against the state of Oregon. This restriction clearly controls and suppresses protected speech. So we hear all these stories about the left trying to fight against free speech and say things are hate speech, but although this is in a different field, I think it's still really important because he effectively just set some precedent on the federal level. A federal district court has ruled the state of Oregon illegally infringed on a man's First Amendment rights for fining him $500 because he wrote, "I am an engineer" in a 2014 email to the state's engineering board. The court ruled that the provision in the law he broke is unconstitutional, which opens the door for people in the state to legally call themselves engineers. I don't see why you can't say a phrase that's free speech. The dystopian saga dates back to 2013 when Mats Jarlstrom's wife was, while driving, was caught by a red light camera near their home in Beaverton, Oregon. Rather than pay the red light camera fine, Jarlstrom, an electrical engineer, spent months researching the specifics of yellow light timing and red light cameras and learned that his wife had likely been ticketed for running a yellow light. Jarlstrom began sharing his findings on his personal website, at conferences, and even got featured on 60 Minutes. He also wrote several emails to the Oregon Board of Engineers explaining what he had found. In the email, he noted that he was an engineer. Rather than looking into whether traffic light timing should be changed, however, the board sent Jarlstrom's a warning and then a $500 fine for the crime of practicing engineering without being registered. Jarlstrom had violated one of Oregon's title laws, which states that no persons may hold themselves out as an engineer unless they are an individual who is registered in this state and holds a valid certificate to practice engineering in the state. So they have this provision that says the title laws restrict constitutionally protected speech. While the court need not reach the question of whether the title laws are invalid in every application, the title laws prohibit a substantial amount of protected speech. The record demonstrates that the threat to free expression is not merely hypothetical. Therefore, from the text of the law and from the actual fact, the court holds that the title laws are substantially overbroad in violation of the First Amendment. Virginia v. Hicks 539 U.S. 113122 2003 quotation marks omitted. I don't know what that part means, but in other words, the only people in Oregon who could legally call themselves engineers in any context were people who were board-certified professional engineers. Jarlstrom has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and spent his career working in electronics, but wasn't board-certified. He sued the state's engineering board, and last week a U.S. District Court for the District of Oregon ruled that state's law is unconstitutional. The statutes prohibit truthfully describing oneself as an engineer in any context. This restriction clearly controls and suppresses protected speech, and law enforcement of the statute against protected speech is not a hypothetical threat, the judge wrote, adding that Oregon's Board of Engineers has a long history of overzealous enforcement actions. Sam Gedge, an attorney for the Institute for Justice, which represented Jarlstrom in the case, found that the state's engineering board had been fining and warning a whole host of people for using the word engineer in public settings. What are we going to do about these software guys that call themselves engineers? We gotta take down Dilbert. Is that a reference to Scott Adams? The law has been deployed against people who use the word engineer in voter pamphlets, ballot statements, business cards, emails, blogs, business names, corporate filings, websites, and even individual photographs on websites, Gedge wrote in one of his legal briefs. Recent targets have included politicians, activists, companies, schools, associations, and ordinary people like Jarlstrom. This is a story about about literal government control of speech at a pretty serious level. And we always hear stories, like lately, the free speech narrative tends to be about the left versus the right, when behind the scenes, since 2013, this has been going on where a government organization was literally restricting speech. So this is really good news on the free speech front. Because, look, we have free speech in this country to an extent. There are certainly things that have to be worked out, and this is part of it. This is good news in the long run because even though this has nothing to do with the culture war, for the most part, it still does assert this protection on speech. Indeed, at a public meeting in February 2014, the Oregon Board of Engineering had a lengthy exchange about the fact that software engineers were illegally calling themselves engineers and joked that the cartoon character Dilbert is not an engineer. I'm not sure if Dilbert's licensed in the state of Oregon, Another member of the board responded. The judge in the case, meanwhile, decided that the software guys can keep calling themselves engineers without worry. The term engineer standing alone is neither actually nor inherently misleading, the judge wrote. Courts have long recognized that the term engineer has a generic meaning separate from professional engineer, and that the term has enjoyed widespread usage in job titles in our society to describe positions which require no professional training. I can't believe it's 2019 now. We're just now resolving this issue that you in the past, at least in Oregon, were not legally allowed to call yourself a word. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there's an issue if you call yourself a doctor and you're not a doctor, but it's only if you're trying to defraud somebody, right? If you want to call yourself whatever, I don't call yourself whatever. The judge ordered that the word engineer be struck from Oregon's law, which is substantially overbroad in violation of the First Amendment, and specifically noted that Jarlstrom may describe himself publicly and privately using the word engineer, and that he may continue to talk about traffic light timing publicly. So they say, Plaintiff Jarlstrom may describe himself, congratulations, you can call yourself what you actually have a degree in, finally. Other states have similar laws in the books, which in theory exist to prevent random people from claiming to be an engineer, and then advertising their services to, for example, build a bridge. The district court decision noted that the state has the authority to restrict the practice of professional engineering, but cannot restrict people from calling themselves an engineer. The judge noted that the law as written treats the word engineer as synonymous with professional engineer and registered professional engineer, but found that there is no fixed meaning to the title. There are many different types of engineers. Wow, how many times do I have to say engineer in this video? The distinction and this court case were particularly controversial online. After I first wrote about Jarlstrom's case in 2017, many readers and internet comment sections began discussing whether software engineers should be calling themselves engineers at all. The takeaway is that engineer is a word that means a lot of things, which is why you have engineers who are the guys running locomotives, and domestic engineers and sanitation engineers and custodial engineers who clean up poop and vomit at schools. Gedge told me on the phone, this has been an issue that has bubbled over and over again for the past 50 years. This decision comes with the much-needed benefit that people who are engineers can now make the unremarkable step of calling themselves an engineer. Congratulations. There are many different types of engineers, and one of them happens to be software. But this is actually important. It is, because it's going to affect general speech and expansion of what you can or can't say around the country. Now, this precedent is mostly going to affect Oregon, but it will likely be cited for time to come. This will definitely seep out into other areas of the culture war and into issues relating to free speech, in that this precedent over the right to call yourself a word is now set in stone by a judge. But what I really liked about this story outside of that is that it stems from the oh-so-beautiful issue of red light cameras. And because of red light camera problems, we now have a free speech victory. Kind of funny. I, for one, think red light cameras are extremely problematic, and we should do something about them. So let's take this last few minutes to talk about the problems of red light cameras. Because there's a famous incident that went viral. It was like a legal case, I think, on Reddit, where somebody turned right on red. Okay, so they pull up to a red light, and you see these images from the red light camera. They stop, then they make a right turn. Turning right on red is actually legal in most states. Yet the red light cameras still find them. In this instance, it sounds like this guy's wife went through a yellow light and was fined for blowing a red light, which isn't the case. And there's something really interesting about fining people with a red light camera for one reason. There's no complainant. There's no complaining witness. You only have the picture of the person driving through an intersection, and sometimes you don't even know if it was actually a red light or a yellow light, or they were turning right. And what happens then is, when someone doesn't break the law and the government fines them automatically, it's a problem. Now let's expand this to the dystopian idea of how YouTube and Facebook and Twitter are policing things algorithmically, and Instagram. What we're seeing with red light cameras is the expansion of algorithmic enforcement to an extent. Right, they have cameras and sensors, and they make the claim. No individual does. A machine makes a claim you broke the law. And then what do? Now you've got to go to court and deal with it. Got to take time off work, got to lose money. It becomes a problem when you realize sometimes people didn't do anything wrong. Okay, so it's fun to hear about free speech stories, but let's look at the underlying issue. His wife may have actually just driven through a yellow light, which is fine, usually, and she got a ticket for it. And there's a friend of mine got a red light ticket. You actually see in the photos, they stop at the light, and they don't move. It's like all the photos show the car's not moving, and then all of a sudden, you can actually see the street lights. It changes, and then they drive through it like they didn't blow the light, and they still got sent the ticket. And what do they have to do? They had to call it in, they had to go to court and try and prove it and waste their time because a machine didn't know what was going on. It made a mistake. It made a mistake. Now look, people make mistakes too. And it does suck when you get pulled over and you get a ticket and you didn't do anything wrong. But now we're going to have robots on all the street corners doing it? That's not going to work out. And think about how they expand that. It's going to go into more areas. What happens when you have jaywalking cameras? Oh, we saw a person cross the street, facial recognition, saw their face. There you go. Now you get a ticket in the mail for jaywalking. What happens then when all of our laws, some of which are archaic and don't make sense, are being enforced to the T? Obviously, blowing a red light's a problem. But what happens when this idea expands? And this is why I think it should be talked about. Because we shouldn't expand it. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. I'll have more videos tomorrow on the main channel, and I will see you all then.